Girard, an academic theorist on the issues of conflict and violence, and a hit Broadway musical, Wicked. It's indeed an unlikely combination. But quite unintentionally on the part of Schwartz and his co-writer Winnie Holzman, Wicked is a powerful and surprisingly accurate musical version of Girard's ideas. Both Girard and Wicked are full of reversals, particularly when it comes to our cherished ideas of good and evil, right and wrong, violence and peace. The problem that both Girard and the musical address is the one of violence justified in the name of goodness, a problem which is difficult and a seemingly intractable one. The news is filled with stories of occupied peoples and rebel militias using violence in the name of freedom. State armies use violence to preserve the peace or spread democracy. Terrorists of all faiths use violence in the name of God. But the crux of the problem is deeper than this easy justification of violence. That's something we know bad guys have always done. The deeper problem is one of those reversals I warned you about, that the people who use the violence don't think of themselves as bad guys. They are the good guys in their own narrative. When the good guys and bad guys are using the same narrative, the difference between them gets blurred a bit. Each side to a conflict, of course, is making the identical claim that the violence they are using is good and justified, while their enemy's violence is somehow completely different. Here's an example. A few weeks ago, the New York Times covered a story from Israel in which a Jewish Israeli boy and an Arab Palestinian boy, both injured in the same tit-for-tat reprisals of violence that have gone on between those peoples for too long, ended up lying side by side in the same hospital ward. In the photo that accompanied the story, both boys were seriously wounded, lying in hospital beds, bandages over their bodies, and hooked to medical machinery, with both families gathered around, distraught, anxious, and worried sick. Now, in a comment on a different violent incident, an official from an ally of one of the governments, and I won't tell you which government or which ally because it doesn't matter. This could have been said by either side of the story. Everyone's telling a narrative in which they're good and the other side is the terrorist. This government official said this: "We call for an end to violence and all acts of terrorism directed against innocent civilians. There is a clear distinction between terrorist rocket attacks that target civilian populations and action in self-defense." Is there really a difference beyond the rhetoric? And I'm not making a political comment here or wanting to tell you which side is right and which side is wrong. That's not the issue. But when the result of terrorism and self-defense is the same, two seriously injured boys and two devastated families, the claims of a clear distinction between them are harder to hear amidst the cries of pain and the mothers weeping. Are you feeling dizzy yet? Rather surprisingly, the hit Broadway musical Wicked deals with this directly. It asks, what kind of narrative transforms violence from a bad thing when we're on the receiving end of it into a good thing when we're using it against others? In other words, how do good people use violence and yet never doubt their goodness? Hence the title of my book, The Wicked Truth, When Good People Do Bad Things. Now, we do not need a scholar like René Girard to tell us that physical violence which leads to injury or death is the end result of traveling down a road of justifying lesser harm. We prepare ourselves to do violence just as we prepare ourselves to play the violin or argue a case in court. Practice makes perfect. We don't begin arguing before the Supreme Court. We start in small claims court and work our way up. And we don't find ourselves able to injure or kill without first having practiced the little ways we can harm one another. The use and abuse of others in terms of emotional, economic, or spiritual harm is our practice field for the ultimate act of violence. Such practice allows us to commit harm without remorse, or as the wizard sings, without moral ambiguity. What we learn is how to become literally blind to the suffering we are causing, and to believe with all our hearts that we can accomplish something good and noble through violent